And LSU, when you look at their first 11 games, they're going to be favored in 10 of them. So you look at that one game, of course, 11th game being Alabama. And so what happens versus Alabama? But by then, what does that team look like? Because no one's going to argue, I think, that they lack talent. That running back room should be much better this year. Replacing Clyde Edwards-Helaire a season ago, it proved to never really get going. John Emery will probably have one of his better years. They're counting on him to have one of his better years. Offensive front should be better. Left tackle, someone's got to have to step up with the Rosenthal kid transferring to Kentucky. But knowing what you've got in Max Johnson, at the very least, you know that he's going to be your guy. Better protect him. Better keep him healthy. There's no doubt. Defensively, they should be much better. Linebacker, which was a question mark a season ago, may be a position of strength. Certainly a position of depth, potentially. Defensive line, you got a guy like Ojulari who can bend the edge, one of the better pass rushers, or should be this season. And the secondary is what LSU always puts out there in the secondary. It's all kind of there. Now does it come together? That's the real question mark. Last year has to have been one of the largest anomalies, not just because of COVID, but when you look at LSU, you knew they were going to retreat on offense. They had to. There's too many guys that went pro. And it was just such a ridiculous output that they had on that side of the ball. But defensively, nobody anticipated that they would have been that hapless on that side of the football with the number of skill players that they've got.
I mean, they returned so many players, which I know is important. So let's do the comparison test. The game is at Baton Rouge with A&M. Are you suggesting
that LSU could beat the Aggies?
That LSU will finish ahead of the Aggies.
I think they will at the end of the season. I think that if this season breaks the way it can, we talked about this yesterday, this opener versus UCLA, you'd kind of think, it's a Pac-12 game. It's on the road in Pasadena. And to start seasons like this, especially coming off the type of year that everybody had a season ago, that's just tricky. That's a tricky thing. It's a time zone thing. It's a travel thing, all the stuff. And, of course, you got new coaches that are just now calling games for the first time together. I don't know that they lose that game. I don't think they do. I'm just saying if they don't play well versus UCLA, then maybe this thing breaks the other direction and they kind of stumble their way through the first half of the season. And by then, you've lost crucial time. But if it starts out well and they're able to come away from UCLA not only with a win but with confidence, then I think LSU, if things can pull together the way we've seen it pull together before at LSU and under Ed Orgeron, they absolutely could finish ahead of A&M.
And they had, a couple of years ago, during their big year, they had that big win against Texas, which helped propel them. And whether it happens or not, I want to stay in the West because Ole Miss getting love, Mississippi State getting hope. What about Ole Miss?
The story's going to be on that defensive side of the ball, but we also have to point that losing Elijah Moore, and as good as he is, and we'll say, he's just one guy at wide receiver. Well, we've seen Lane Kiffin offenses before where he'll pick a guy who can be that production, the Amari Cooper type, where you know what, you're just going to be it, and you're going to have ridiculous numbers, and I'm good enough of a play caller, and I can design things, and I got a trigger man in Matt Corral where I can get the ball to you, and I'll do it over and over, and I'll do it over and over again. And he's no longer there, so who emerges? They have opportunities there. They have guys that could be that. Is it the Sanders kid? Is it the Drummond kid? We don't know. But there's bodies out there that could be that. You move John Rice Plumlee to the slot, and you think, he used to play quarterback, was kind of a running back. But, he's perfect for a slot-type receiver. Might have been the best move for the kid's career. Maybe he doesn't get on the field that much. Who knows? But there's enough question marks for Ole Miss, I think, offensively, where I don't know that it's necessarily going to be a juggernaut plus based on what we saw from a season ago. Everybody wants to look at that Alabama game and be like, man, they're offensively unstoppable. You could point to other games like versus Kentucky where that offense just went on sabbatical for like a quarter and a half, maybe longer in the middle of that game where you're going, what happened? Where's the offensive production? And it just bogged down. If that happens for Ole Miss, then there's no way they'll have the type of season that some think that they might. Coaches thought they were a top 25 team.
After that, and we'll leave Alabama because everybody talks about Alabama, but you have this group, State, Arkansas, Auburn, which we haven't mentioned. Who intrigues you out of that group?
Auburn's always going to be interesting because you got year 3 under Bo Nix, and here's this program where 2 out of the last 4 years they beat Alabama. This program is not necessarily on the mat, but last year with the 6 wins, how real were those 6 wins? When you can think about 3 of those were somewhat dubious, we'll call it. 3 of those wins, right? Where you're thinking about the Kentucky game, somewhat controversial. The Arkansas game, certainly controversial. That's effectively a loss that ended up breaking the right way. Had to make the kick. I get all that. Should have been a turnover. Should have been game over. And then Ole Miss, there's a couple of calls in that
Very
one.
controversial.
A couple of plays that kind of broke the other way. So you're looking at a team that maybe was a 2 or 3 win team a season ago. And yet, you've got what's thought to be one of the better running backs. If he stays healthy and Tank Bigsby, they could be pretty good. That offensive line has to improve, and I think they can and will. If Bo Nix can get somewhat comfortable in the passing game, knowing that they're going to be pivoting relatively hard to a Bobo Harsin hybrid, because they're both offensive-minded coaches, the head coach and the offensive coordinator, what does that look like? Who steps up at wide receiver? Because otherwise, defensively, I think they're going to be good. They're not going to be the Auburn defenses where in the past couple of years we talk about them able to squeak out a couple of wins versus Alabama. They're contending for an SEC championship in 2017. A lot of that was driven by ridiculous defense, phenomenal defense. I don't know that they have dudes on that side of the ball. They've got good players, but I don't know that they have game-changing talent like they've had in the past, either along the defensive front, even in the secondary right now. And they might have one of the better secondary players in the country.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.